Holo Health listeners, I'm so excited you're tuning into this episode. It is me, your host, Alex Cottingham. If this is your first time, thank you so much for tuning into the Holo Health podcast. This episode is going to be special because I have a near and dear friend that's not just an acquaintance. Chris, you have really grown in my life as a deep friend and someone I look into and someone that's been inspiring me. So we get to dive deep into all things Chris Peck, which makes me very excited. Chris, first off, how you doing?
I'm doing great today. I mean, it's a gorgeous Friday here in Atlanta, and had a chance to get up early this morning. Got a run in, and actually just had breakfast with one of the guys in my men's group. So I'm good. I'm doing great today.
And now we are having a podcast conversation about true health and pilgrimages and all the good stuff, which we're going to get into. Chris, for the people who
Sure.
don't know you, who are new to Chris Peck, give us a 60-second snapshot on who you are, how we're connected, and then we'll kind of dive deep into your story a little bit deeper.
Yeah, got it. So now my wife Lisa and I live here in Atlanta. We've been here almost 10 years, but retired here after a long career with UPS. So been retired for a few years right now, about 5, and we've made Atlanta our home. Buckhead Church is our home church, so we've been here for the past several years as well too. And you and I, Alex, met at Buckhead Church. In fact, when you were doing one of the initial, I think, offerings of True Health. And Health is Freedom, just using the titles of your book as well too. So
Right.
it's been great to experience and get to know you throughout that process and the coaching engagement that followed.
So give a little bit more context about that, Chris, as far as like, what was this thing at Buckhead Church? What was the group? What was your experience like? Because this could be new to some people listening. What was that like?
Yeah, so good. So, our men's group uh, leader on staff there at Buckhead Church pushed out the invitation about a 4-week on-site program to really talk and explore God's design for true health. That piqued my interest, as it did about a dozen folks that came on 4 successive Monday evenings, really, which you and Trevor walked us through the 7 habits of health and had an opportunity to, have a little bit of, at that time, lecture, because I don't know if you've created all the videos at that stage yet. Some of them you
Right.
certainly did.
Right.
And then really some small group discussion, kind of breaking out, hey, what does this look like in your life? What are some of those stressors? What are some of those challenges? Which of the habits do you find most challenging, or you find yourself most difficult to upkeep with as well? So that process, kind of having some theory, some application, and then of course ending it with 30 minutes of movement. Habit number 3 as well too. So that was all great part of the design. And I know that you've since created a content for that to be delivered virtually or in person, that are complementary to your 2 books that you've written, on the same topic as well. So did a subsequent session with you, Up and Coming Strength and Fitness, with a little bit slight shift there on the delivery. And of course, having it at your gym was great. Having all the equipment there to be able to, get the 30 minutes of movement in that way was wonderful too.
Chris, those are shared memories that I'll never forget. I mean, that's what kickstarted our friendship. But immediately there was connection. There was synergy of like, hey, we both are passionate about the same things. I mean, you're so involved in the church and helping people experience like spiritual freedom and relational health and financial health. We've talked a lot about that, Chris. But there really wasn't a connection to the health side, like the physical health side. But there was the connection between us because we were passionate about both. We're going to church to pursue these areas of health, but we're also pursuing our physical health in other areas at the gym and likewise. But we're trying to do that together. And that's the vision of Holo Health. If you're just tuning in or you're listening to this because you're friends with Chris, like, I don't really know about this podcast, is our vision is to help people experience a truly healthy life in every area in Jesus, that we believe there's so many more parallels and connections between your health and faith. And that's what this program, the books, the podcast, the content is all about. So let's not belabor that anymore. Chris, I want to know all about you because this is what this episode is all about. Give us a few minutes on your story, your health story, your faith story.
Hmm.
How did Chris Peck come to be Chris Peck? Some main influences, people, um, places in your life. Give us a few minutes of
Hmm.
that.
Sure. There's a lot there. I'll start, I guess, with the faith journey. So my father was Catholic. My mother was Quaker. That alone may tell you that there were some pretty radical differences theologically
Sure.
growing up as well too. I was raised Catholic, but my parents divorced when I was young. But I continued through First Communion and confirmation, but then immediately stopped going to the Catholic Church and started to attend Quaker services at the time. Actually went on and graduated from a Quaker boarding school, high school in Ohio, and and then after that, I would say during my marriage, our faith was mostly Lutheran.
Hmm.
So we had again a little bit of diversity in terms of denominations and so on along the
Where'd you
way.
go? Where'd you go? How'd you go from Quaker to Lutheran?
So I have so if there was one hallmark in my family, it would be diversity, and that
Okay.
is racial diversity, spiritual diversity. I think political diversity as well too.
Wow.
So I have a very diverse set of siblings, and my oldest brother is Lutheran, and sort of invited me, if you will, to attend some Lutheran services, contrasting those at the time with the Catholic Church more. Uh, and my wife was raised Lutheran, so there was sort of a tie in there that sort of made sense for us to attend Lutheran services. But then we moved to Atlanta. We came to Atlanta and we were doing some church shopping, and a friend of my wife's put us in contact, invited us to a service at Buckhead Church. I still remember it vividly. First weekend in October of 2017, the service was "What Happy Couples Know." If you
Yeah.
remember that series, it's a wonderful series that I've listened to at least
Phenomenal.
two dozen times. Uh,
Yes.
to really just refresh on those very fundamentals that Andy speaks so well about when it comes to
Right.
relationships and expectation and so on. Um, Shortly thereafter, we got in our first group, small group, and that was a married couples small group. And then also got involved in the financial ministry program of North Point, which is called MoneyWise. So my wife and I have both led that program. I'm an individual MoneyWise mentor, sort of working one on one with couples or men in that program regarding financial health. So one of the areas that you and I know have talked about as well too. That's complementary to all of this that's in Holo Health as well too. Um, and then started a men's group as well too. Was in a men's group. Have been a men's group leader now for about the past I think 3 years as well. By the way, was baptized at Buckhead Church as well too in January of 2019.
Oh,
Even though I
cool. I
did
didn't
have a
know that.
baptism, yeah, I had an infant baptism, of course, as a Catholic, as I would have, but also was blessed to be able to be baptized there, the public baptism that we all know so well within North Point. So that's on the faith side. On the fitness side, um, like a lot of people, I mean, that's ebbed and flowed over the years, depending upon the season of life, right? And I think if I looked at the high and the sort of the low, I mean, early in my 20s, I ran my first marathon, um, and then had a lapse into my early 30s on the fitness side for the most part. Always ran a little bit, but nothing too terribly much. And then, like a lot of folks, married, young kids, you're running. Your focus on diet is not necessarily the best. You're looking for time just to, you know, go to the bathroom, much less focus on your fitness as much too. So definitely went through that phase in my 30s of a little bit of increasing waistline, never anything crazy, but certainly over the last 10 years or so had a chance to focus more on my physical health, and without question that's been one of our priority areas right now as a family is faith, family, friends, fitness. um, those are sort of some of those core areas that we've been
Yeah.
focused on. So my wife and I have definitely been more in tune with that, which is why when the invitation came from the church here about True Health, that really piqued my interest. And as you well know, your reason and timing for creating the framework that is Holo Health today is common for everyone. Hey, I'm going here for my spiritual health. I'm maybe going to a therapist for relational help, or to my church. Um, Not quite sure what I'm doing. Maybe in this area of um, financial health. That's another area that folks are sort of struggling with. So your framework, if you will, the 7 Habits of Health, really spoke to where I was at this stage of my life, which is really with an increased focus on um, total health, true health, and that John 10:10 life to the full. I don't have any tattoos, but if I have one, it might be John 10:10, I think. So
Hey, maybe we can go get matching tattoos together. I don't have any myself, but if I had to, it would be something like that as well. Um, Chris, I kind of want to dig into that really quick before we move on. Is just our first exposure to health. Throughout the years, it sounds like you've had some different evolutions of what that looked like. Um, Something here we try to do at Whole Health is we try to provide some correct understandings of what health is, because when we just take our cues from culture, we believe it's just physical, it's just diet and exercise, it's a punishment, it's image manipulation, it's just hey, I'm just going to go to the gym and leave it there and then go back to my normal life. Where we're trying to say, hey, health is so much bigger and broader than that. Where was your first exposure to health, and what were some misunderstandings that you kind
mm,
of wrestled with a little bit, and how has that changed and developed and been redefined over the past few years?
yeah, I would say some of my early exposures. So my dad was a marathon runner. He
Okay.
started a little bit later in life. So my first marathon that I ran with was actually with him many years ago. And so and by the way, he also went to the gym, started about the same time, 6 days a week. So no doubt, and this wasn't early when I was young, so this was in my 20s at
Okay.
that stage, was that exposure to him. And I thought, hey, I'm going to try this running thing out. Seemed to have good genes for it, for distance running. Um, so my earliest framework would have been focused on that. Now, I'll also tell you that was of a generation and a time, because this was, a few years ago, when a lot of folks thought, hey, as long as I exercise and, I'm burning calories, I can pretty much eat whatever I want, right?
Sure.
And
Sure.
some people metabolically may be blessed with that, but still the quality of that food, right? And, so sort of, um, are in the habits that you have about eating one clean meal a day, or trying to get that up to
Mm-hmm.
80%. That was not a focus for him until later in life, right?
Gotcha.
And I don't know how much it was in culture. Let's face it, that sort of shift is, to there on better and more nutritious food. So it was really on the calorie burning side of the equation, right? Hey,
Gotcha.
burn enough calories, and if I can do that, then I don't have to really focus as much on the quality of what it
Mm,
is I'm eating. So those would have been my earliest exposures that I would
okay.
have had, kind of in my 20s, and of course that's developed and expanded here over the years too, and aging certainly makes a difference on that metabolism
Yeah.
piece as well too, but also just in how you feel. And as you well know,
Yeah.
our coaching engagement, the one that we had for 3 months, was really
Yeah.
focused on that habit of eating clean, right? How do I
Mm-hmm.
improve the quality, and not just the quality, but eating that which is going to match and support the physical level of activity that I have, which is still quite high.
It's funny you bring that up, because a lot of people's first exposure or even misconception of health is calories in, calories out. That if I just burn 300 calories from the donut I ate, then I'm good. Where when we look at nutrition, there's three main levers to pull from. We have quality, quantity, and then timing. Where a lot of people just look at the quantity. They just look at, okay, if I'm burning 2,000 and eating 2,000, I'm just going to maintain. But you can actually have the same calories in, calories out, and not have the right body composition or the right internal health that you want, that's why the base layer is always quality, and which is what we worked on a lot. Is like, hey, protein and produce, getting enough protein in, because the American diet is so saturated with carbs and fats that most people undereat like high quality protein, and then getting some sort of fruit and vegetable on every single plate. Hydration was another big one that we talked about, and then also the timing and the travel and all that stuff. But yeah, nutrition is obviously a huge fundamental piece um to just overall true health, Chris. And I appreciate you sharing that. I would love, Chris, to transition here to a really big recent part of your story, which we were talking before we started recording, is not necessarily a hike or an excursion, what's called a pilgrimage. And you were the first one out of, this is not a slight flex, this is just reality of the hundreds of podcasts I've done. You're the first one I've interviewed about a pilgrimage. I'll be honest. So I'm really excited to hear about this. Obviously, we were texting in the middle of it. You were not on your phone. But, Chris, if someone is just listening that has no context, what in the world am I talking about? A pilgrimage? What did you do? And dive deep into the experience, because this is, I mean, a once in a lifetime pivotal moment for you.
Yeah, there's no question. So I just got back, I think 3 weeks ago now, from a really incredible, as you say, a once in a lifetime experience. And it really, it had been something that had been on my radar for quite some time, but a challenge. And I'll tell you why it kind of never got on the calendar. So I happened to be on vacation with my wife. We were in Europe in April, and my wife reached out to a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, that had other plans and was just going to wish him well. And he said, "Oh, change of plans. Not going to do that trip. He's now going to walk the Camino de Santiago." Uh, and For those that don't know, so the Camino de Santiago, translated, by the way, means the way of Saint James.
The
That's the
way of St.
translation,
James.
the way of St. James. And the reason that it's called that is in Santiago, Spain, which is in northwest Spain. So at the end of the journey, if you will, are the remains of the Apostle James. So James, the brother of John, the sons of Zebedee, that James, right, who had a ministry and was doing work in the country of Spain. It was early in the 8th century that they found his remains, moved them to Santiago, and then a cathedral was built upon his remains. And it has been a pilgrimage that has been in place for 1,200 years.
Wow.
And while
Wow.
Yeah, and an early pope, probably, and I think if I wasn't mistaken, it was in the 15th century, a pope determined that this was one of three pilgrimages of Christendom, would be Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago. So for 1,200 years, pilgrims, as they're referred to, have been making this journey from many different routes. The oldest and most traditional and longest route is called the French Way. So it starts in France,
Wow.
in Western France, at the border of the Pyrenees Mountains that separate France and Spain, and continues eastward onto the province of Galicia, and ends in Santiago. And then there's actually a little 3-day add-on to get to what was known as the end of the earth. In fact, the town is called Finisterre, which means, literally translated, end of the earth, end of the world. So we continued on the additional 3 days to Finisterre, or to the end of the earth. So incredible experience. And I guess so many, when I think about what some of the really great aspects of this were, on the first side of it, I would just tell you that deciding to do a digital detox and a digital Sabbath for the 34 days it took us to walk 650 miles. So having zero news, sports, social media, podcasts, music, not even any
Wow.
music. And by the way, this was a decision. We had connectivity. I had to use
Oh,
it to
okay.
to make sure we weren't lost, right? Because there's, following all trails to make sure you're going the right way and
Sure.
things like that. So it's not like I didn't have it, but I said, hey, I'm going to turn all this stuff off and choose not to have that for
Sure.
over a month. I think
Wow.
if I just did that anywhere where you were, if I was here in Atlanta, that would bring about certain benefits. Certainly, when I add to that being in nature and having God's beauty revealed in nature, in people, in food, and just all of the experiences that you're able to, take advantage of and really experience. I mean, the other thing is sort of the value of surrender, being surrendered, because this came up on 1 week's notice, and I had nothing
Yeah.
with me to do this walk. I had no shoes. I literally, the day that my wife and our trip ended, I ran around Rome for about 6-7 hours, bought everything: shoes, pants, jacket, um, backpack, sleeping bag liner, poles, walking pole, everything, and then flew to
Wow.
France. Same day, flew to France, and the next day we took a train and started. So, but the value of being open to that, because if I had had too much notice and probably would have talked myself, wait a minute, I don't, there's a
Is
lot
this
here I don't
smart?
know
Should I
about.
do it? Right.
Exactly. And instead just saying, you know what, God put this opportunity in front of me. You know, I'm not going to say no to this. I don't know what it looks like, but I'm just going to have faith and confidence that it's all part of a plan that I may not see all the visibility to. So, um, and by the way, taking a gratitude journal along the way every day, just
Mm.
for what was showing up, taking the time to be able to do that. In the end, having the margin, right? And I know you talk a lot
Mm.
about margin, and we've talked about that particularly with habit 4 and 5, having that margin to be able to see and open to those opportunities that God puts in front of us. There's
Yes.
no question. And I recognize I'm going to start this right now because I probably lost a lot of people. Sure, Chris, it would be great if you could take a month off, right? To walk across, to walk across Spain. From a practical perspective, how many folks can do that?
Right.
I will tell you, the people that do it 1 week a year times 5,
Mm.
so
Mm.
they go back kind of, or do segments of it. But even if you do this for a half a day, of having that digital detox and just that time out in nature, whether it's hiking, makes a huge difference. Another big takeaway is just the value of slowing down. And I can't
Yeah.
overemphasize this. I mean, His grace has a rhythm, right? We know that. And experiencing life at the pace of walking, right?
Mm.
Huge. I mean, we were not in any moving vehicle or, literally everything is occurring at the pace of walking. Um, and in fact, when we finished at the end, we took a bus back to Santiago. So in 75 minutes, we were in a bus that took us 3 days to walk there, as an example. So
Wow.
things
Wow.
slowing down and being able to never be in a rush. We were never in a rush. We had no timetable,
Jeez.
right? We just said we're going to take this as a day comes. I mean, we had forecasted rain sometimes. We're trying to pick it up to get through. But
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
notwithstanding that and getting out of the weather, but otherwise realizing we have a provincial father who I don't have to worry about any of this. I don't know where I'm going to stay.
Wow.
I don't quite know where we're going to find food. Um, I will say habits 1 and 2, so sleep and clean eating, suffered a bit over the trip, and that's just because when you're sleeping in common hostels with 20 people in one set of 4 walls, that
Oh,
affects your sleep
wow.
quality.
Just a
It
little
affects your
bit.
sleep just a little bit as well too. And then the food, just trying to find, when you're doing all of that, the right quality food. Protein bars, for example,
Right.
very, very hard to find. um,
Huh.
and trying to determine actually how much protein was in them. They use a
Sure.
little bit different methodology there too on that side. So, but those are, I mean, I guess just some of the biggest takeaways of the experience that you could imagine. Again, just having that time away, disconnected, and the value that is able to nourish your soul is just. I've never had an experience like that in my life.
Chris, I don't know if I've talked to many people that have had that experience in their life. Like I said, a once in a lifetime thing. I'm really curious, and I want to take a few minutes to kind of hit how it impacted the different areas of you, because what I think is one of the most inspiring pieces to me is that this wasn't like a marathon you trained for 6 months. You had a 1 week notice, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do it. I bought everything, hopped in a plane, trained, boom, you were there. This is, I'm going to brag on you. You're not going to brag on yourself. Chris, how old are you?
61.
Chris, 61. I know many people who are in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s. I don't know if I could list 10 people off the top of my head that have the physical capacity in 1 week to go walk. I have your stats pulled up because you texted me. 6 days left of the trip, total steps 1.1 million steps on an average of over
Mm.
40,000 steps a day. I'm not even talking about the spiritual, relational, or even emotional components to this. We'll get to that. But just to have the physical capacity at 61 in 1 week to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this. I mean, I wrote a book called Health is Freedom. Your health gave you the freedom to experience a once in a lifetime opportunity to absorb and soak in and appreciate so much that God has to offer because your health sustained you there. I mean, that's what's so inspiring to me. I told you before we started recording is that this is a living embodiment, a practical application of what true health and life to the full is all about because your health sustained you towards that. It wasn't a hindrance that you had to focus on, oh, I got to get home for my checkup or I didn't bring my enough prescription pills or my lower back hurts. Is like, no, you have been a good steward of your health, body, mind, and soul, but specifically the body here, that when you were on vacation, you were able to pivot and say, okay, I'm going to go do this 34-day pilgrimage, average over 40,000 steps a day, get over 1.1 million steps, and be able to enjoy it. I mean, that is amazing. Do you have anything to tackle on there, Chris, before I kind of
Uh,
ask some more questions?
there's no question, and I mean, you did explain that well too. And the title of your book, "Health is Freedom." I mean, there's no question, and I think, and I think you've also said, hey, you're either going to pay the price of good health or pay the price of bad health. Which one of those do you want to focus on? And there's
Yeah,
no question. I mean, I've been so blessed, and particularly here in recent years, and just even getting that clarity around what's most important. And it's why I'm so excited again about your book and the framework that you have and the teachings, right? Too, is it puts into place people that are so confused and overwhelmed. Where do I start?
right.
I hear this. They're frankly overwhelmed by all the
Yeah,
misinformation and misunderstandings. So to
yeah.
declutter that, simplify it, let's not overcomplicate it, right? What is movement 30 minutes a day? Well, does that mean I got to go run? Does that mean I have to ride a bike? No, you really simplified it. And of course, that leads to, greater enhancements of what that movement looks like, just like it does on clean eating, just like it does going on sleep, quality, quantity, uh, uh, you know, um, consistency, with
Timing.
respect to that
Yeah,
too. You start to refine that a little bit, but the framework is broad enough applicable to everyone that you're right, that prepares you for, the functional type movement that you're talking about to live life that's out there and to do it in a compelling way. I mean, it's funny, but by not knowing what I didn't know, and sure enough, it's like when you buy a car, you start to see the car. All of a sudden, I had people go, "Oh," because I now have people that have walked this, family members. I mean, they're
oh wow.
cousins, but I didn't know they did
Sure.
this. They never said anything, and it's like one of those things that doesn't come up until it comes up. So, there are a number of folks, and by the way, they're from all over the globe that are doing this. And I'll also say, you cannot look at someone walking this same distance and determine what their health is by just looking at them. You'd be blown away by the folks older than me in their 70s,
Right.
in their early 80s, who have done this 4, 5, 6, 7, even 8 times, right?
Wow.
To
Wow.
do all the different ways to get there. So, absolutely, there's no question. Having a base did give
Yes.
me the freedom to be able to say yes to this that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to do.
I mean, health comes in all sizes. Health is, I believe, first internal and not external. You can't judge a book by its cover. Just like how health is more than physical. You look at someone and like, oh, they don't look good. Well, health is not just how you look or how you feel. It really is the
No.
freedom you possess, your alignment with God's design, how consistent you are with the 7 habits. Like there's more than meets the eye. So just having the capacity and the freedom to do that, I mean, like I said, inspires me so much. Chris, let's say someone's listening that is inspired by you and what you're able to do, but they're just not there, and they've struggled with their health, they're confused on what to do. Um, what would you encourage them with? What would you tell them? How would they start? What would be your piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, and I know you've talked about this in your books as well too, um, particularly on the habits of self-awareness and minimizing stress, right? So one of the biggest barriers, right? Biggest barriers to us um, achieving health, right? In all of its dimensions, right? Across all the 7 habits, right? Body, mind, and soul too, is this thing, right?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
the are these devices, right? There's no question. And not only the frequency and the distraction component of it, but just an overwhelm of information. There's too much information. There are too many things that are pulling us in different directions. Is it good to eat this? Is it not? What's the best way to burn fat, to burn calories? So there's value in simplicity, right? I mean, streamlining and simplifying, right? And then building a habit around that. And really, once you do that and you decide, hey, here's what I'm going to focus on. So we'll use the 7 habits of health, right? For purpose of that, you're not just going to throw a switch. And I think our expectations in this immediate gratification culture are thinking, while it's simple in terms of complexity, doesn't mean it's not demanding, right? So
mm,
that how do I put into place still, if I'm going to make sure I'm going to get my proper sleep at night, right? How do I make sure I'm building a routine and a habit to get to bed at a certain time, right? And you guys do a great job talking about that too for habit one, such that I can wake up well rested, energized, right? To set my day off to a great start. Um,
yeah,
and then the same thing. So building a habit around that. So you have to start small, right? That may
right,
mean that again, you talk about TV and distractions and blue light and all of those things at night that you can minimize to prep for sleep. So there's certainly an education information component. Then I think there's a behavioral, habit framework that you can start small and then just build some
sure,
habits. And if you don't follow through, it's just giving yourself grace. The next
yes.
day, picking back up. Great. I crushed that, sleeve of Thin Mints, which is a personal weakness of mine, you know, and, but you know what? Today's a new day. Here's what I'm going to do now moving forward.
That's right.
And not beating yourself up too much, which happens a lot.
You're spot on. I mean, simplifying, getting 1% better every day. Trevor and I talk all about, you just said this, information plus application equals transformation. The educational piece,
Oh,
knowing what
good.
to
Yeah.
do, simplifying, doing the main things. The application piece is, like you said, demanding, intentional, consistent, but it's actually the doing that makes a difference, like Andy talks about, equals getting the goals you want, getting the results, the transformation. So it's both an information and application piece, which is what we're addressing at Whole Health. But what you just said is another piece that we like to talk about is the true health paradox. What do we do when we don't do what we should do, right? When I should
Hmm.
sleep 7 to 9 hours a night, when I should move for 30 minutes, when I should believe truth and not lies, when I should read the Bible and not check Instagram. It's, well, you're going to treat yourself how God would treat yourself and give yourself grace and let that motivate you to make the best next choice rather than living in guilt and shame for doing that. It's called the true health paradox. It's not living in the should, not living in the shame, but striving for the should
Right.
regardless, which is a whole separate conversation.
It is, but I think the point you talk about, and two things come to mind. Number one is recognizing, in your language, the cultural undertow and just the sheer volume and magnitude of uh, misinformation, of
Yeah,
pulling you in a direction away from health, right? That is out there every day, and thinking that we're going to be able to on our own without some reinforcement, without some building of habits, without some turning the noise down on those other
Right.
things,
Right.
right? Is we're naive if we think that that's the case. When we know, these companies that are engineered to have us go in unhealthy directions, right? And
Yeah.
media. And then the second thing I'm reminded of too is Atomic Habits. So big James Clear fan.
Yeah.
He talks about habit stacking. How do I give myself that reward or build one habit on another in very small ways that over time really do accumulate? There's that compound interest of that 1%, that habit, stacking, if you will, on a daily basis.
If you have not checked out Atomic Habits, go buy it. It's changed my life. It's one of the best books in our generation. The comment I wanted to talk on, Chris, that you just mentioned is having an anchor point from all the misinformation. The cultural undertow is so strong that we need an anchor point.
Mm,
That here at Holo
yeah,
Health, our anchor point is Jesus. Jesus is the full embodiment of true health. He was what a man should be. He was what a woman should be. He had a physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual component to that, which is why when we sift through all the misinformation, we actually go back to Jesus and actually go back to God's design and say, hey, what does scripture have to say about this? Where do we find in the garden? What did Jesus embody? And when we actually put two and two together from those, scripture has a lot more to say about our health than just, oh, go to church, believe in Jesus, go to heaven when you die, and then go back to your life. Like, we've reduced spiritual and Christianity down to just a mental belief system that we can just check the box, go to heaven when we die, and then resume our life, where we're saying Jesus invites us to live life to the full. I love Dallas Willard. He says, Jesus didn't come to teach us how to get to heaven when we die. He told us how to get to heaven before we die. And it's called the abundant life.
right.
He demonstrated that abundant life that he comes to offer. But kind of going back to the health piece is that God designed humanity, designed us like him, and he designed us holistically. And when we look at scripture, our anchor point is that. So we now know what misinformation to put aside, but not even the misinformation, because a lot of information has validity. But what I have found, Chris, is that many people major on the minors, or they make the peripheral the core issues. For example, at the time of this recording, Chris, cold plunges are a huge fad right now. Like, everyone is saying if you cold plunge every day, it's going to change your life. Here's the reality. I've cold plunged before. It makes a really big difference. There are a lot of health benefits. But in my opinion, and when you look throughout scripture and just science in general, it's not one of the biggest needle movers. If you look at health in its entire pie, your sleep, your nutrition, your movement have a lot to do, probably more to do than how consistently you're cold plunging, what supplements you're taking, or what Instagram nutrition account you're following. It's like, hey, your sleep, your nutrition, your movement are the biggest needle movers of your health. And we actually get those designs and get that from what Jesus embodied in scripture shows. So that was pretty much my riff on just how Jesus is the anchor, and that what we're doing here at Holo is we're merging, hey, our pursuit of Jesus is the pursuit of health, because Jesus is the representation of true health, and we're going to follow him and just apply it the best we can. So
Yeah, I mean, as you're describing that, I'm thinking of the focus on, and you're right, we can get distracted very easily. And the other great Dallas Willard quote is, "We must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from our lives."
that's
Right?
it.
That's the other thing. And to sort of simplify that, to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, to ultimately do what Jesus did, which is
Amen.
love others. So. But yeah, that focus on certainly the macronutrients. Hey, cold plunges, you're right. I think that's like the micronutrient stuff, right? If you're not
Exactly.
focused on the macros though first, hey, those micros are only going to help you so much. Let's focus on, that protein, carbohydrates, fat. Focus on those in the
Right.
right proportion. It takes care of a lot of the other things. Your professional athletes, sure, they're doing, hey, what can I get to get that 1/10 of
Sure.
1% better in my sport?
Exactly.
There's absolutely a place for that as well too, but people get distracted by all of those
Yes.
things.
Yes.
That's the,
You're
that's the
spot on.
challenge.
You're
Yeah.
spot on. Chris, as we're rounding third in this episode, and kind of coming home, I got one or two more final questions. I appreciate you so much. Chris, one thing I would love to hear from you is, What are some of the consistent things you do every single day to live a truly healthy life? Physically, relationally, emotionally, spiritually.
Mm,
And yeah, we could list the 7 habits of health as far as like sleeping well, sleeping 7 to 9 hours. That's a very common one. But when it comes to increasing clarity, that could look very different. Cultivating community looks different from for everybody. You're obviously a part of many groups. What are just maybe three, four, or five of like keystone habits that you prioritize that make the biggest difference when it comes to your health?
sure. Um, so I would say the first thing is getting clarity on what's important, right? In a world where
Priorities. Yeah.
everything's important, right? I mean, gosh, and you can, and but turn on the news or turn on any media channel, and everything will seem important. And I know a lot of folks, certainly in business today, the same thing. You can't have 12 priorities though for a company, or you lose focus, your efforts get diffused.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing, I think, when it comes to our health. So in our case, my wife and I, that is faith, family, friends, right? Fitness, these, you'll see the alliteration here with the F's, right, as well too. But fitness, fellowship, uh, took a little license with philanthropy, even though it's not an F, it's a PH, but that's okay as well too,
Sounds like it.
right? And this focus on how fortunate we are, gratitude, right, if you will.
Mm,
So I know that's a lot that I listed. Really, the big three of, hey, faith, family, and friends. That's
yeah.
where the focus is. So
Yeah.
therefore, does my calendar reflect that? Does my
Yeah.
calendar reflect that which we're saying is most important to us? A lot of times it's not. And it's not perfect, right? And this is a practice, right? This is a practice to be sure about that too. How do we go about implementing that? I would say is by slowing down,
Mm,
right? Silence, solitude, simplicity, service, right?
mm,
Are those almost the operationalizing of that? So, I get up early in the morning. Um, don't need to, but I guess I'm a bit of a morning person as well too. So my first hour in the morning is in Scripture. It's in
mm.
U version, to be specific, using that platform, right? To the devotional series that are in there as well too. So it's starting my day with a renewing of my mind, right?
That's good.
Focusing on truth, focusing on what God tells us to be true and what's true about me,
Yeah.
therefore, such that that is preparing me for the day and the world and culture and everything else as well too, to constantly maintain that grounding, right, if you will.
Mm,
I think that's a critical part of that too. um, Typically, that'll transition then to where my time of working out is typically also in the morning, shortly thereafter, right? And I do a variety on the fitness side, as you know. We've discussed this before. I'm not, even though I'm a runner, it's not my, that's sort of the maybe the core of that too. But we'll do other sports as well too. My wife loves tennis. We play tennis. We play pickleball, rowing. Riding, of course. Strength training too. So having a variety to that
yeah.
too, some diversity in
Yeah.
that. I think on that side too, before, and then sort of a first meal of the day winds up being a little bit later in the day in terms of uh, the clean eating as well. And then I think the other thing, tied to that, you're right, and this is a spiritual discipline, is fellowship. It's community. It's habit number 6. It's how do I make sure, because I can do all this in my own head theoretically and
Right.
in a
Right.
vertical relationship with our Father, but we are meant to be in connection and in community. So I think my men's group that I have as well too, and other small groups throughout church that just provide a reinforcing mechanism to support each other in our
Yeah.
journeys and living of life too, to be able to have that is without question another, foundational, you know I don't see that changing for the rest of my life, kind of a habit or a discipline.
Chris, my last question is I want you to speak into this because I cannot, you can. Um, Health at your age. So, context, I'm in my late 20s, you're in your early 60s, and I've coached many people, even older than you, Chris, that have said, just wait till you're my age, or it must be nice to when you're young. And the assumptions are that they've reached their pinnacle. It's all downhill from here. I can't enjoy the freedom or enjoy like the fitness that I could when I was younger, and that essentially that the older you get, the more you lose and the more you just deteriorate and sit in your nursing home and wait to die. And I'm like, no. And obviously there's some sort of hyperbole behind that, but it's
Hmm.
just the
Hmm.
belief that health is limited by my age. And I have coached, witnessed, been around, talked to, you included, people who are debunking that. People that are 10, 15 years either older than you, Chris, that are doing the exact same things, that are still going to the gym, playing with their grandkids, going on runs. I mean, I know people, even in my own family, that are in their upper 80s now that are still living independently, that because they've stewarded their health well. So, what would you just
Yeah.
tell our community, maybe people who are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, about health and why it's not limited by the age?
Great question. And it's a great one to end on as well, too. So, you talked about the misconceptions of health, right? In the book, in the program as well, too.
Yeah, yeah,
You just listed off a whole bunch of other misconceptions of health, which is it's a young person's game. I'm
right.
past my prime. Once you get above, fill in the blank on the age. You know, some people would tell you once you get above 40, others 50, some say 30, by the way, right? My 20s were my best decade. What I can say is, again, that's not true. That is a misconception. In fact, what I would tell you with 100% candor and honesty, my 50s were better than my 40s. My 40s were better than my 30s, and my 30s were better than my 20s in a
Wow.
multitude of ways, not just in
Wow.
my physical health, right? And I'm I'm I am 100% committed and clear that my 60s is going to be better still than the previous decade. So, one of the truths that I know too is everything up to now, whatever age you're at, if that's in your 40s, in your 70s, in your 80s, everything up to now has been a preparation for what is to come, and
That's
the
good.
best is yet to come. The best is yet to come. So if you live into that reality and speak
Yes.
into that reality, right,
Yes.
things show up. There is a plan for that, and right, John 10:10 doesn't end at 50, right, or
Yes.
fill in the
Come
blank,
on.
right,
Amen.
right. John, it didn't have an expiration date on it, I'm pretty sure, right.
That's so
uh,
good.
and while there's so many people, and that we hear about, and that you hear about these people doing amazing things at amazing ages, right, too, that's inspirational certainly for a lot of other folks. But people sadly get caught in a cultural narrative around my best years are behind me, I'm going to
Right.
hang on now and do what I can to live as long as I can. But life gets very small. It's
Yeah.
tragic, I think. It doesn't need to be that way. And
Yeah.
thankfully, your program, your books, your teachings, your framework are giving people some insights to that, to, I think, help them understand John 10:10 is available to everybody and at every age, even if you're 100.
You know what's funny is what I'm just now realizing and processing in real time is when you're saying, hey, the best years are behind me, they were in my 20s and 30s. What we like to do is, like you said, uncover some of those misunderstandings and misconceptions and just false narratives. Is that underneath that, from culture's perspective, health is only physical, health is only image manipulation, health is how you look, health is your weight. So essentially, what we can assume is that in your 50s and 60s, you probably aren't going to look like you did when you're in high school, college, 20s, and 30s, right? But
Of
the
course.
assumption then is that health is how I look, and my looks decrease with age, so then my best years are behind me. But what we're saying is that health is more than just physical. Health is not just how you look. What I like to say is health is about ability, not vanity. That health is freedom. You have higher capacity now at 61 than you did at 20 and 30. But your best years aren't behind you because your definition of health isn't just physical, it's your
That's right.
ability to love God and love others by operating out of a healthy self, body, mind, and soul. So that's why even just the definition of health has changed, because if we just believe health is physical, then of course our best years are behind us because it's only physical. But it's not. It's more than physical. It's mental, emotional, relational, spiritual. And as we age and mature, like you said, we gain more so we can love other people better. So I just had to riff on that. I know you're going to say
No,
something.
you're no. You're absolutely right. I mean, everything you said is spot on accurate. There are many dimensions of health that in my 20s, and I suspect a lot of people in the 20s were horrible, right? Whether that was spiritual health, relational health, financial health, the self-awareness component, stress,
Right.
all of those things that as you age, in fact, a number of those you get healthier and grow stronger,
Wow.
when it
Yeah,
comes
it's
to
a
some of those
great
other
point.
areas of life you do that you don't have at different seasons of life. You may not have the ability to be as focused on those.
You're
For example, in your late 20s with a bunch of
yes.
kids and,
Or
right?
even just think marriage, for example. I mean, we're two husbands. I mean, my marriage
Yeah,
now is way better than it was in the first year or two. You were in the honeymoon phases, but the things you grow through and the things that you learn and adapt and love your spouse better. I mean, if you're doing it right and following Jesus, it's going to be better at year 10, 15, and 20 than it was at 1 and 2 because you haven't gone through some of the highs and lows. And like you said, some of the happiest couples I know have been married for 20, 30, 35 years because they've put the work in before that. Chris, we're just riffing and we're just kind of
absolutely.
preaching to
Yeah,
the choir at this point. I
sure,
appreciate
sure.
you so much. Every time we talk, I'm inspired. Truly, and I mean that. I'm not just saying that either. I'm just so glad that God has intersected our paths. Um, I appreciate your time here. Chris, is there any last minute things you want to share before we wrap up?
No, like I said, I want to acknowledge you as well too. When we met, and the gift and the blessing that your work is. That again, I think in some cases for some folks, a framework or 7 things may sound like oversimplifying. There's value in simplicity and
Yeah.
focus,
Yeah.
right, as well too. So kudos to you and Trevor both for what you've put together. This platform, the podcast, the online trainings as well too. Just want to thank both of you as well.
Chris, I appreciate that. And I receive those words. We will see you later, Chris. Hello, Health. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in another episode of the podcast. Until then, you're a legend. See y'all.